She popped the champagne the moment the judge signed those divorce papers. Lacey Mitchell, 26 years old, thought she had just won the lottery, the wealthy husband, the $4 million mansion, the black American Express card with no limit. She watched the ex-wife walk out of that courtroom with nothing but a small briefcase and a strange, quiet smile. Lacey thought that smile meant defeat. She was dead wrong. Because within 72 hours, every credit card would be frozen. The mansion would be empty, and that wealthy husband she stole. He was not a prize, he was a parasite, and the host had just left the building. What Lacey did not know was that Vivian Harper was never the boring housewife Grant described. She was the woman who built everything Grant claimed to own. She was the woman who paid off his student loans with her mother's inheritance. And she was the woman who had just discovered her husband's secret bank account in the Cayman Islands, his kickbacks from a federal investigation, and the FBI agent he had been flirting with for months. Grant Sterling thought he was the smartest man in every room. He never noticed the trap closing around him. This is the story of how a forgotten wife became the most dangerous woman her cheating husband ever met. Value statement and lesson. This story will teach you something important. When a man hands you divorce papers before you even know there is a problem, you are not in a negotiation. You are in an ambush. But here's what they never tell you. The ambush can go both ways. This is a story about betrayal, yes, but it is also a story about power. The kind of power that does not come from money or lawyers or a man telling you what you are worth. It comes from refusing to disappear when everyone expects you to. Meaning of the story. Every woman who has ever been cheated on, lied to, or made to feel invisible will see herself in this story. And every woman who watches until the end will learn the most important lesson of all. The best revenge is not making him suffer. The best revenge is making yourself whole. I found out my husband was cheating on me the same day I finished paying off his student loans. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids in college, and a mistress young enough to be my daughter posting selfies in my kitchen. Let me back up. My name is Vivian Harper, and on the morning of October 14th, I was sitting in the parking garage of Henderson & Associates Accounting, where I had worked as an office manager for the past 11 years. I was eating a granola bar and scrolling through Instagram, the way you do when you have 7 minutes before your shift starts and you just want to zone out. That is when I saw her. The photo showed a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with blonde hair extensions and lips that had clearly met a needle more than once. She was standing in a kitchen I recognized immediately because I had picked out every single tile, every cabinet handle, every light fixture in that kitchen. It was my kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe, the kind I would never buy for myself because $47 for something you wear for 10 minutes seemed wasteful. And around her neck was a necklace I recognized even more intimately than the kitchen. It was my anniversary necklace, the one I had bought for myself 3 years ago because Grant forgot our 20th anniversary. He had been too busy with work, he said. Too stressed. I had smiled and said it was fine, and then driven myself to the jewelry store and picked out a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. I told myself it was a gift from both of us. Now this girl was wearing it in my kitchen, and the caption read, "Home Sweet Home," with a heart emoji. I sat in my Honda Civic for 47 minutes. I was not crying. I was doing math. 23 years, 8,395 days of cooking his meals, washing his underwear, and pretending his jokes were funny at dinner parties. I had worked 2 jobs while he built his marketing firm. I had skipped vacations so he could reinvest in the business. I had worn the same winter coat for 6 years because he needed a new car for client meetings. And this girl got to skip all of that and walk straight into the life I built. The worst part was not the betrayal. I had suspected something for months. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he angled his phone away from me when he texted. The worst part was that she was using my good dishes. I could see them in the background of the photo. The white porcelain plates with the gold trim that I only brought out for Thanksgiving. This girl was eating leftover pizza off my grandmother's china. I do not remember walking into work. I do not remember sitting at my desk or answering phones or filing reports. I moved through the day like a ghost, smiling when people talked to me, nodding at the right moments, while inside my chest something was collapsing. At 5:15, I drove home. Grant's car was in the driveway, which was unusual. He rarely got home before 7, always so busy building his empire. I parked behind him and sat there for a moment, gathering myself. I was going to confront him. I was going to demand answers. I was going to be strong. I walked through the front door and found him sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, the same table where our kids had done homework and blown out birthday candles and announced college acceptances. He was not alone. Spread out in front of him was a stack of papers, and standing beside him was a man in a gray suit I had never seen before. They both looked up when I entered, and Grant's face arranged itself into an expression I did not recognize. It was almost rehearsed, like he had practiced it in a mirror. "Vivian," he said, "we need to talk." The man in the gray suit excused himself and stepped onto the back patio, giving us privacy. Grant gestured to the chair across from him, the way he might gesture to a client or a subordinate. Not the way you gesture to your wife of 23 years. I sat down. Grant slid the papers across the table toward me. I looked down and saw the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," printed at the top. "I know this is a shock," Grant said, and his voice had that calm, measured tone he used when he was closing a difficult deal. "But I think we both know this marriage has not been working for a long time. We have grown apart. We want different things." I stared at him. My mouth would not form words. He kept talking, filling the silence with rehearsed phrases. He wanted to be fair. He wanted this to be amicable. He was prepared to be generous. I could keep the house. I could have one of the cars. He just wanted to move forward with his life, and he hoped I could understand that. "The house," I finally managed to say. "You're giving me the house." Grant smiled, relieved that I was engaging. "See," he said, "I knew you would be reasonable about this. That is what I always loved about you, Vivian. You are so practical." He pushed a pen toward me. There was a yellow sticky note on one of the pages with an X marking where I should sign. "This is just a preliminary agreement," he explained. "It says we both agree to proceed with the divorce in good faith. My lawyer," he nodded toward the man on the patio, "says it will make everything go much smoother." I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking, but not with sadness, with something else, something I could not name yet. "I want you to leave," I said. Grant blinked. "What?" "I want you to leave this house, tonight. You can come back for your things later, but right now, I want you gone." His face hardened. "Vivian, be reasonable. This is my house, too." "No," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "This is the house I cleaned and maintained for 23 years while you were out building your business. This is the house where I raised your children. You can sleep somewhere else tonight, maybe with the girl in the Instagram photo, the one wearing my necklace." Grant's face went pale, then red. He opened his mouth to say something, probably a lie, probably an excuse, but I did not give him the chance. "Get out," I said. "Now?" He left. But before he walked out the door, he turned back and looked at me with something like pity. "You should sign those papers, Vivian, while I am still feeling generous." Then he was gone, and I was alone in my kitchen, holding divorce papers I had not asked for, wondering how 23 years had come to this. I did not sign the papers that night, but I made a mistake that would haunt me for months. I called the number on the lawyer's business card the next morning. I just wanted information, I told myself. I just wanted to understand what was happening. The man in the gray suit, whose name was apparently Robert Chambers, was very helpful, very understanding. He explained that Grant just wanted a clean break. He explained that the preliminary agreement was standard, nothing binding, just a show of good faith. And I, tired and scared and desperate to make the pain stop, signed it. I did not read the fine print. I did not know that buried in paragraph 7 was a clause waiving my right to investigate hidden assets. Grant knew. He took a photo of my signature before I even set down the pen. He was smiling. The week after I signed that preliminary agreement was when I learned exactly how much I had lost. It started with the bank. I had always let Grant handle the finances. He was the one with the business degree, the one who understood investments and portfolios and tax strategies. My job was to manage the household, to make sure the bills were paid on time and the pantry was stocked. I had access to our joint checking account, and I checked the balance occasionally to make sure we were not overspending. That was the extent of my financial involvement. On Monday morning, I logged into our bank account to see how much we had. I wanted to understand our assets before I talked to a lawyer of my own. The balance in our joint checking was $847. I stared at the screen for a long time, certain I was reading it wrong. We had always kept at least $15,000 in checking for emergencies, and last time I looked, which was maybe 3 months ago, we had over $20,000. I clicked on the transaction history and felt my stomach drop. 2 months ago, Grant had transferred $180,000 to an account I did not recognize. The memo line said investment opportunity. I called the bank. After 45 minutes on hold and 3 different representatives, I learned that the account the money had been transferred to was in Grant's name only. I was not authorized to access it or even receive information about it. That was Monday. On Tuesday, I discovered Todd the house. I had always assumed we owned our home outright. We had bought it 18 years ago with money from my parents as a down payment, and Grant had assured me that we had paid off the mortgage years ago. So when a letter arrived from First National Bank addressed to both of us, I opened it without thinking. It was a mortgage statement. According to the letter, we owed $340,000 on a home valued at approximately $380,000. Grant had taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago, and the payments were now 3 months overdue. My generous gift, the house he was so willing to let me keep, was a debt trap. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, I found out about the retirement accounts. I remembered that we had a financial advisor, a man named Thomas who Grant golfed with occasionally. I called his office and asked for a summary of our retirement holdings. Thomas was reluctant to share information at first, something about client confidentiality, but I reminded him that my name was on the accounts too. What he told me made me sit down on the kitchen floor. Grant had taken a hardship withdrawal from his 401k 6 months ago. Nearly all of it. The account that was supposed to fund our retirement. The account that I had contributed to for years when Grant said he could not afford to contribute because the business needed cash flow was nearly empty. And the hardship? According to the paperwork Grant had filed, it was to pay for emergency medical expenses. We had not had any medical emergencies. That was Wednesday. On Thursday, I discovered the credit cards. I had always had one credit card in my own name, with a modest limit that I used for groceries and gas and paid off every month. But when I tried to apply for a new card, just in case I needed emergency funds, I was denied. The denial letter cited my debt to income ratio. I pulled my credit report for the first time in years. I was a co-signer on $67,000 in credit card debt. Cards I had never seen. Cards Grant had opened for business expenses and personal purchases, including a $12,000 charge at a jewelry store 8 months ago. I thought about the necklace around that girl's neck in the Instagram photo. I thought about my anniversary necklace that I had bought for myself. The $12,000 charge was not my necklace. It was hers. That night, I called my sister Jenny in Michigan. We were not particularly close. She had her own problems, her own life, but she was blood, and I needed to hear a familiar voice. When she answered, I tried to explain what was happening, but the words would not come out right. I kept starting sentences and losing them. Finally, I just made this sound, half laugh and half scream, and Jenny went quiet on the other end. "Vivian," she said carefully, "how bad is it?" I told her the numbers. The $847 in checking, the $180,000 transferred away, the $340,000 mortgage, the $67,000 in credit card debt. When I finished, Jenny was silent for a long moment. "You need a lawyer?" she said finally. "A real one, not whoever Grant is using." "I know," I said, "but lawyers cost money, and I have $847. "Then you need to find a way to get more," Jenny said, "because from what you are telling me, Grant has been planning this for a long time." "You are not in a negotiation, Vivian. You are in an ambush." She was right, of course. But that night, lying alone in the king-sized bed I had shared with Grant for over 2 decades, I could not think about lawyers or strategy or fighting back. I could only think about one thing. 23 years of doing everything right, packing his lunches, skipping vacations, wearing the same winter coat for 6 years, and I was going to end up with less than I had at 25, back when I was just starting out and thought the future was full of possibilities. I went to work the next day because I could not afford to miss a paycheck. I smiled at my coworkers. I answered phones. I filed reports. During my lunch break, I was eating a sandwich in the break room when Carol from accounting sat down across from me. "Vivian," she said, her voice bright with gossip she thought was harmless. "I saw Grant at Martinelli's last night, that fancy Italian place downtown. He was with a young woman. I assumed she was your daughter, but I did not know Madison was in town." I felt my face freeze. "She is not," I managed to say. "Oh," Carol said, her brow furrowing as she realized she had stumbled onto something uncomfortable. "Well, maybe a client then. You know how Grant is always entertaining clients." "Maybe," I said. I finished my sandwich. I did not taste any of it. That night, I came home to find a car I did not recognize in my driveway. I parked on the street and approached cautiously, my keys clutched between my fingers the way women are taught to do when we feel unsafe. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and heard voices coming from upstairs. Female voices, laughing. I climbed the stairs, my heart hammering, and followed the sound to the master bedroom. There she was, the girl from Instagram. Lacey, I would later learn her name was. Lacey Mitchell. She was standing in my closet, my walk-in closet that I had dreamed about for years, holding up my clothes and showing them to another young woman I did not recognize. "This is all so dated," Lacey was saying. "We will have to gut the whole thing. I am thinking maybe California closets, and we should definitely knock out this wall to expand into the guest room." I must have made a sound, because they both turned to look at me. Lacey's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked almost like amusement. "Oh," she said, "you must be Vivian. Grant said you might stop by to get some of your things." I looked at this girl, this child really, standing in my closet, wearing my necklace, making plans to tear down my walls. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked. My voice was shaking. Lacey tilted her head, the way you might look at a slow dog who could not learn a simple trick. "Grant gave me a key," she said. He said it was fine since you signed the preliminary agreement. Something about shared access to marital property? She shrugged. Anyway, I am just taking measurements for the renovation. Do not worry. I will be out of your hair soon. She turned back to the closet, dismissing me. I think this wall can definitely come down, she said to her friend. I want one of those chandeliers in the center. Very old Hollywood. I stood there for a long moment, invisible in my own home. And then I turned and walked out. That night, I sat on my bathroom floor with a calculator. I had $3,400 in my personal checking account. I owed approximately $407,000. My credit was destroyed. I was 48 years old, and my children, Madison and Tyler, had not returned my calls in 4 days. I later learned that Grant had told them I refused to try marriage counseling and gave up on the family. He was paying for their college tuition. I could not afford to. I looked at myself in the mirror, gray roots showing, bags under my eyes. When did I get so old, so tired, so invisible? And I thought about giving up, not in a dramatic way, just stopping, stop fighting, let him have everything, move somewhere nobody knew me, disappear. I stayed on that bathroom floor until sunrise. 2 weeks after the worst night of my life, something changed. I was sitting at my desk at work, going through the motions of being a functional human being, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. The message said, "Vivian, this is Margaret from church. I heard about your situation. My cousin Barbara is a divorce attorney. She is very good. Call her." Attached was a phone number. I stared at the message for a long time. I had not been to church in months. Grant had always complained that Sunday mornings were his only time to sleep in, and eventually I had stopped going to keep the peace. But apparently the church gossip network was still functioning, and word of my divorce had spread. I called the number on my lunch break. Barbara Reynolds answered on the second ring. She had a warm voice, professional but kind, and she listened without interrupting as I explained my situation. The secret mortgage, the hidden transfers, the credit card debt, the preliminary agreement I had signed without reading. When I finished, there was a pause. Then Barbara said the words I had been desperate to hear. "He made a mistake," she said. "Several mistakes, actually. The financial transfers you are describing, they are clumsy, traceable, possibly illegal. If we can document the dissipation of marital assets, we can make a case for a 60-40 split in your favor. Maybe even alimony." Hope bloomed in my chest for the first time in weeks. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Barbara explained that she would need all the financial documents I could gather. Bank statements, tax returns, anything that showed our assets and how they had been distributed. She also warned me that Grant's lawyer would fight back hard and that I should prepare for a long battle. But the most important thing, she said, is that you do not sign anything else without showing it to me first. "Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "Absolutely." I hung up the phone, feeling something I had not felt in weeks. I felt like maybe I was going to be okay. That night, I actually slept through until morning. For the first time since finding that Instagram photo, I did not wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing. I had a plan. I had someone fighting for me. I started gathering documents. I found old tax returns in a filing cabinet in the basement. I printed bank statements from our joint account going back 5 years. I made copies of the mortgage paperwork that had arrived in the mail. I even allowed myself a small fantasy, Grant trying to explain to his young girlfriend why they were moving from a house to a studio apartment. "Baby," I imagined him saying, "I know I said I was rich, but have you heard of minimalism?" It was petty, but it made me smile. Over the next 2 weeks, Barbara and I talked almost every day. She reviewed my documents. She explained my options. She outlined a strategy for the preliminary hearing, which was scheduled for the end of the month. The more we talked, the more confident I felt. Barbara seemed to know exactly what she was doing. She had handled cases like mine before, she said. Husbands who thought they were clever, who thought they could hide money and get away with it. She knew how to find the truth. 3 days before the hearing, I tried to call Barbara to go over my testimony one final time. She did not answer. I left a voicemail. Then I sent an email. Then I sent another voicemail. No response. The next day, I drove to her office. It was in a professional building downtown, the kind of place with a law firm on every floor. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and found suite 412. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight smile, looked up when I entered. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I am here to see Barbara Reynolds," I said. "I am her client, Vivian Harper." The receptionist's eyes flickered with something, recognition maybe, or pity. "Let me see if she is available," she said, and disappeared into the back. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Finally, the door to the inner office opened, and Barbara walked out. She was not alone. Standing beside her, his hand resting casually on her lower back, was Grant. They were both smiling. The world tilted sideways. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the reception desk to steady myself. "Barbara," I said, "what is happening?" Barbara's smile did not waver. "Vivian," she said, her voice still warm, still professional, "I think we should talk." She led me into her office. Grant followed, closing the door behind us. I stood there, looking between them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Grant spoke first. "I told you she was easy to manipulate, Barbara," he said. He was not talking to me. He was talking about me, as if I was not even in the room. "She still thinks people are basically good." Barbara nodded, her expression sympathetic. "It really was almost too easy," she said. "She trusted me completely, told me everything. I felt like I was going to vomit." "What is this?" I managed to say. "What are you doing?" Grant sat down in one of the leather chairs facing Barbara's desk, making himself comfortable. "Barbara and I went to college together," he explained. "We dated for a while, actually. She has been helping me with some legal matters for years. So when I needed a way to make sure you did not cause problems during the divorce, I asked her to reach out." "The text from Margaret," I said slowly. "The recommendation from church." "Margaret works in my office," Grant said. "I asked her to send that message as a favor." Everything I had told Barbara, every fear, every strategy, every piece of evidence I had gathered, it had all gone straight to Grant. "And the preliminary agreement," Barbara added helpfully, "the one you signed? There was a clause in paragraph 7 that waives your right to investigate hidden assets. Grant wrote that clause specifically, and you signed it." I remembered Grant taking a photo of my signature. I remembered him smiling. "The hearing is the day after tomorrow," Grant said. "And thanks to everything you told Barbara, I know exactly what you are planning to argue. My lawyer is ready." He stood up and straightened his tie. "You should just accept the settlement I offered, Vivian. The house and one car, because after the hearing, you might not even get that." He walked out of the office without looking back. Barbara remained seated, watching me with an expression that was almost kind. "For what it is worth," she said, "you seem like a nice woman. But you picked the wrong husband. And now you are going to lose everything." I stood in that office for a long moment after she finished speaking. I had no lawyer. I had no strategy. Everything I had told Barbara, every secret, every vulnerability was now a weapon pointed at my head. The hearing was in 72 hours. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk in the cold October air, watching cars pass by. Normal people going to normal places, living normal lives. I had trusted someone, and she had betrayed me. Here is something they do not teach you in school. When a man has divorce papers ready, before you even know there is a problem, he has been planning this for months, maybe years. He has already moved money. He has already talked to lawyers. You are not in a negotiation. You are in an ambush. And I had just handed my enemy the map to every weakness I had. The hearing was a disaster. I showed up without a lawyer, clutching a folder full of documents that Grant's team had already seen and prepared to counter. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, listened to both sides and then ruled on almost every point in Grant's favor. Temporary spousal support, denied, because I had signed a preliminary agreement indicating I could support myself. Access to hidden assets, denied, because I had waived that right in paragraph 7. Exclusive use of the marital home, denied because the property was jointly owned and Grant had agreed to share access. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing, less than nothing, and it got worse. When I returned to work the next Monday, my boss called me into his office. Harold Anderson was a man I had worked with for 11 years. He had sent me a fruit basket when my mother died. He had given me time off when the kids were sick. Now he sat behind his desk and told me I was being restructured out. "I am sorry, Vivian," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Budget cuts. You know how it is." I knew how it was. Grant had called him. I was certain of it. Harold played golf with Grant every other Saturday at the club. Grant had told him I was unstable, difficult, a liability, and Harold, my boss of 11 years, had believed him. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. 11 years of my life fit into one cardboard box. A photo of Madison and Tyler from their high school graduation. A coffee mug that said, "World's okayest mom." A gift from Tyler when he was 16. A small plant I had kept alive for years. I carried the box to my car and sat there for a long time, not sure where to go. That was Monday. On Tuesday, my daughter called. Madison was 21, a junior at Ohio State studying marketing. She had always been closer to Grant than to me. "Daddy's girl," people said, and I had tried not to let it hurt. "Mom," she said when I answered, and her voice was thick with tears. "What is happening? What did your father tell you?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "He said you refused to try marriage counseling. He said you gave up on the family. He said you have been acting erratic, and he is worried about you." I closed my eyes. "Madison," I said, "none of that is true." "Then why is this happening?" she demanded. "Why are you doing this to him?" I wanted to explain everything, the affair, the hidden money, the betrayal, but Madison was still a child in so many ways, and Grant was paying for her education. If I told her the truth and she confronted him, he might cut her off. He was vindictive enough to do it. "Your father and I have different perspectives on what happened," I said finally. "I hope someday you will be willing to hear my side." Madison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me you might say something like that. He said you would try to manipulate me." I could not speak. "I have to go," Madison said, and she hung up. My son Tyler was 19, a freshman at the same school. He had not answered my texts in a week. Now I understood why. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, I came home to find Bebamum Lacey Mitchell in my living room. She was not alone this time. There was a photographer with her, taking pictures of the house. Lacey was directing him, pointing to different angles, explaining what shots she wanted. When she saw me, she smiled. "Oh, good," she said. "You are here. Grant wants to list the house. He said you agreed to sell it and split the proceeds." "I did not agree to that," I said. Lacey shrugged. "Well, the preliminary agreement says you did. Something about jointly disposing of marital property? Anyway, the real estate agent is coming tomorrow, so you might want to clean up a bit." She looked around the living room, wrinkling her nose. "It could really use some staging," she said. "Maybe some fresh flowers? And you should probably take down all those family photos. Buyers do not want to see someone else's memories." I looked at the photos she was pointing to. Madison's first birthday, Tyler's soccer trophy, my mother holding both kids on her lap, taken 6 months before she died. Get out, I said. Lacey raised her eyebrows. Excuse me? I said, get out. This is my house. You are not welcome here. Lacey laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, the laugh of someone who has never faced real consequences. Grant warned me you might get difficult, she said. He said you have been having mental health issues. She pulled out her phone. I am going to call him. Do whatever you want, I said. But if you are not out of this house in 2 minutes, I am calling the police. She left. But I knew it was not over. That night, I sat on my bathroom floor for the second time in a month. I had $3,400 in my personal checking. I was unemployed. My children thought I was the villain. My house was about to be sold out from under me. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. Gray roots, dark circles, skin that seemed to have aged 10 years in the past month. Who was this woman? When did I become so small? I thought about my mother. She had died 4 years ago, leaving me an inheritance of $52,000. I had used $47,000 of it to pay off Grant's student loans. The rest had gone into our joint savings, which Grant had transferred away. I thought about my father, who had died when I was 12. Heart attack. He was only 45. I thought about Madison, who believed I was a monster. About Tyler, who would not even respond to my texts. I thought about Grant and Lacey, probably drinking champagne right now, celebrating how easily they had destroyed me. And I thought about giving up, not dying, nothing that dramatic. Just disappearing, taking my $3,000 and driving somewhere far away and starting over as nobody. No history, no family, no memories. It would be easier, so much easier, than fighting. I stayed on that bathroom floor until 3 in the morning, trying to decide if I had any fight left in me. I did not find an answer that night. But the answer found me the next morning. At 6 in the morning, my doorbell rang. I had not slept. I was still wearing the clothes I had worn the day before. My hair was tangled, and my eyes were swollen. I considered not answering. Whoever it was, they could not possibly have good news. Maybe it was the real estate agent Lacey had threatened. Maybe it was Grant with more papers for me to sign. The doorbell rang again, then again. I dragged myself off the couch, where I had finally collapsed around 4, and shuffled to the door. Standing on my porch was Dorothy Whitman. I knew Dorothy only vaguely. She lived in the house at the end of our street, a small Cape Cod with a garden that was always immaculate. She was in her mid-70s, with silver hair she wore in a neat bun, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. In the 10 years I had lived on this street, I had spoken to her maybe a dozen times. Brief conversations about weather and mail delivery, and nothing important. Now she was standing on my porch at 6 in the morning, holding a thermos of coffee and a manila folder. You look terrible, she said. I stared at her. It seemed like an odd opening for a conversation. I brought coffee, she continued, and some things I think you need to see. Can I come in? I did not have the energy to say no. Dorothy walked into my house and headed straight for the kitchen, moving with the confidence of someone who had been there before. She found 2 mugs, poured coffee from her thermos, and sat down at my table. I sat across from her, still not understanding what was happening. I heard about your situation, Dorothy said. Small neighborhood? Word travels? Great, I said flatly. Just what I needed. Dorothy looked at me with those sharp blue eyes. My husband pulled the same thing in 1987, she said. I blinked. What? 31 years of marriage, Dorothy continued. Secretary half his age. He thought he was so clever with the accounts, moving money around, hiding assets. She took a sip of her coffee. He died in 2003. Massive heart attack. You know what I felt? I shook my head. Relief, Dorothy said. And then guilt for feeling relieved. Don't let him steal that many years from you. She slid the manila folder across the table to me. I was a paralegal before I retired, she said. 30 years at Morrison and Associates downtown. When my husband pulled his stunt, I used everything I had learned to fight back. And I kept the records. I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, court filings, financial affidavits, a list of names and phone numbers. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because when I saw you come home last night, Dorothy said, you looked the way I felt in 1988, like you were deciding whether to keep fighting or disappear. I did not say anything. She was not wrong. That list of names, Dorothy said, pointing to the last page in the folder, those are lawyers who specialize in cases like yours. They take payment from the settlement. You do not need money up front. I looked at the list. There were maybe 10 names, with notes written beside each one in neat handwriting. The one at the top, Patricia Morrison, Dorothy said. That is my old boss's daughter. She is tough as nails, divorced twice herself. She knows every trick in the book. I stared at the name. Why are you helping me? I asked finally. We barely know each other. Dorothy set down her coffee mug and looked at me directly. Because I kept these files for 35 years, she said, and I always knew that someday I would meet a woman who needed them. She paused. You are not fighting just for yourself, Vivian. You are fighting for every woman who comes after you. Every woman who thinks she is too old, too poor, too invisible to win. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time in days. What if I am not strong enough? I whispered. Dorothy reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. You found out your husband was stealing from you, she said. You lost your job. Your children have been turned against you. You have been betrayed by someone you trusted, and you are still here. Still breathing, still getting out of bed in the morning. She squeezed my hand. That is strength, Vivian. Everything else is just details. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Dorothy stood up. One more thing, she said. Change your locks. That girl has a key? Please, in my day, we would have loosened her car's lug nuts. I almost smiled. Is that legal? I said in my day, Dorothy replied. Now we have lawyers. She walked to the door, then turned back. Call Patricia, she said. Today. Do not wait. And then she was gone. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after Dorothy left, looking at the folder she had given me. I thought about what she said, about fighting not just for myself, but for every woman who comes after. I thought about my mother, who had stayed in an unhappy marriage for 30 years because she did not think she had any other choice. I thought about Madison, who might someday find herself in my situation and who deserved to know that women could fight back. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Patricia Morrison. She answered on the third ring. Patricia Morrison's office was on the 8th floor of a building downtown, with a view of the river and diplomas covering every wall. She was 58 years old, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she had heard every lie a cheating husband could tell. She reviewed my case for 2 hours without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and laughed. I stared at her. This was not the reaction I expected. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. It is just that your husband is dumb, like impressively dumb. He thinks moving money between his own accounts is hiding it. He left a trail a blind auditor could follow. I felt a tiny spark of hope. You can help me? Patricia nodded. The preliminary agreement is a problem, but it is not insurmountable. The clause about waiving asset investigation only applies to retroactive investigation of assets disclosed before the agreement. It does not cover assets hidden after the agreement was signed. I did not understand half of those words, but I understood the important part. So, there is a way forward, I said. There is always a way forward, Patricia said. But it is going to take time. Months, probably. And it is going to get ugly. Are you ready for that? I thought about Dorothy's words, about fighting for every woman who comes after. Yes, I said, I am ready. Over the next 3 months, I learned what fighting really meant. It meant working the night shift at a grocery store because I needed income and no one else would hire me. I stocked shelves from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, and then I went home and slept for 4 hours before getting up to work on my case. It meant living in a studio apartment on the wrong side of town because I could not afford anything better. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster, and the elevator smelled like something had died in it. But it was mine. It meant documenting everything. Every text from Grant, every Instagram post from Lacey showing off expensive purchases, every receipt and bank statement I could find. My first night stocking shelves, I was putting cans of soup on a shelf when a woman from my old neighborhood walked by. I recognized her from Grant's company Christmas party. She looked right through me. The way you look, past furniture. I was not hurt. I was relieved. I was finally invisible. And invisible people can watch, can listen, can plan. After 2 months, I got my first piece of good news. Patricia called me at 7 in the morning, right after I got home from my shift. Grant's business partner wants to talk, she said. Richard Calloway had been Grant's partner at Sterling and Stone Marketing for 15 years. I had met him at countless company events, a quiet man with glasses who always seemed more interested in spreadsheets than small talk. He is angry, Patricia continued. Apparently Grant has been skimming from the company, writing off personal expenses as business costs, hotel rooms, jewelry, trips, all billed as client entertainment. Lacey's Cartier necklace, I said. Among other things, Patricia agreed. Richard has been keeping records. He is willing to testify. I felt something unfamiliar. It took me a moment to recognize it as hope. What does this mean? It means your husband is not as smart as he thinks he is, Patricia said. And it means we have an ally. The next month brought more developments. My son Tyler reached out. It was just a text, short and awkward. Hey, Mom, heard some stuff. Not sure what to believe anymore. Can we talk? I called him immediately. We talked for 2 hours. I did not badmouth Grant. I did not try to turn Tyler against his father. I just told him the truth, as simply and clearly as I could. At the end of the conversation, Tyler was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry I did not answer your texts, he said finally. Dad made it sound like you had just given up on everything, like you did not care about us anymore. I will always care about you, I said, no matter what. We were not okay. Not yet, but we were talking. And that was more than I had dared to hope for. I also joined a support group for divorced women. We met every Tuesday night in the basement of a church, sitting in folding chairs and drinking bad coffee and sharing our stories. There was Margaret, whose husband had hidden assets in cryptocurrency. Sarah, whose husband had convinced their children she was an alcoholic. Janet, whose husband had actually hired a private investigator to find dirt on her. We were all different ages, different backgrounds, different stories, but we all had one thing in common. We had all been underestimated, and we were all still fighting. By the end of month 3, Patricia called with a new development. Grant's lawyer has reached out, she said. They want to settle. I held my breath. What are they offering? $175,000, Patricia said, plus the car. In exchange, you drop all claims and agree not to pursue further investigation. I sat down on my tiny apartment's only chair, a folding metal thing I had bought at a thrift store. That is more than I thought I would get, I admitted. It is, Patricia agreed, but there is a reason. He is offering it. What do you mean? Patricia's voice was careful. When someone suddenly wants to settle, it usually means they are hiding something bigger, something they really do not want you to find. I thought about Grant's smug face, about Barbara Reynolds and her betrayal, about Lacey Mitchell measuring my closet for renovations. What do you think I should do? I asked. That is not my decision, Patricia said. But I will tell you this. We found a trail leading to a bank account in the Cayman Islands. We do not know how much is in it yet. But if we keep digging, we might find something much bigger than $175,000. I looked around my tiny apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling, at the window that did not quite close all the way, at the life I was living, because Grant had taken everything. Then I thought about Lacey posting a video last week, showing off her new closet in my house, the closet where my mother's portrait used to hang. She had replaced it with a neon sign that said, "Boss Babe." Keep digging, I said. Grant did not take my rejection of his settlement offer well. Within a week, the attacks began. First, he called Madison. My daughter called me in tears, more confused than ever. Dad says you are mentally unstable, she said. He says you are obsessed with revenge. He says he is worried about you. I am not unstable, I said, as calmly as I could. I am fighting for what is fair. He offered you $175,000, Madison said. Why is that not enough? Because he stole more than that, I said. Much more. Madison was quiet. I could tell she did not know what to believe. Dad offered to pay for my wedding, she said finally. He said he would handle everything, but only if I do not invite you. My heart cracked. Madison, I said, whatever you decide, I will still love you. But she had already hung up. The attacks continued. Grant spread rumors through our social circle. I was abusive, he told people. Controlling. I had refused to let him have friends or hobbies. I had driven him into the arms of another woman. Old friends stopped responding to my messages. People I had known for 20 years suddenly could not meet my eyes at the grocery store. Someone created a fake social media profile in my name. It posted unhinged rants about Grant, vicious attacks that made me look exactly as crazy as he claimed I was. I reported the profile, but it took weeks to get it taken down. By then, the damage was done, but the worst attack was legal. Grant filed a countersuit accusing me of dissipating marital assets. He claimed I had hidden money. He claimed I had secret accounts. He claimed I was the one who had been stealing from our marriage all along. It was insane. It was a complete lie. But his lawyer filed the paperwork, and suddenly I was not just fighting for my fair share. I was fighting to prove I was not a criminal. Patricia called me with the news. They are trying to bury you in legal fees, she said. Make you spend so much defending yourself that you give up. Can they do that? They can try, Patricia said. But here's the thing. They are panicking. That means we are getting close to something. I did not feel like we were getting close to anything. I felt like I was drowning. That night, I called Dorothy. I want to quit, I told her. I cannot do this anymore. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Do you know why I kept those files for 35 years? She finally asked. You told me. Because you knew you would meet a woman who needed them. That is part of it, Dorothy said. But the real reason is that I wanted to prove something. What? That women like us can win, Dorothy said. That we are not too old, not too poor, not too invisible, that we have power, even when everyone tells us we do not. I do not feel powerful, I whispered. You stocked shelves for 3 months while building a legal case, Dorothy said. You rebuilt your relationship with your son. You joined a support group. You did not give up when everyone expected you to. She paused. That is power, Vivian. Real power. The kind that does not come from money or lawyers or a man telling you what you are worth. I wiped my eyes. What if I lose anyway? Then you lose fighting, Dorothy said. And that is still better than losing running away. I stayed on the phone with her for another hour. When I finally hung up, I did not feel strong. But I felt something else. I felt stubborn. And sometimes, stubborn is enough. 3 weeks later, there was a knock on my apartment door. I was not expecting anyone. Patricia usually called before coming over. Dorothy texted first. Tyler was back at school. I looked through the peephole and froze. Standing in the hallway was Lacey Mitchell. She looked different than the last time I had seen her. Thinner, paler. She was wearing less jewelry than usual, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, instead of the elaborate styles she favored. I considered not opening the door, but something in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched, made me curious. I opened the door. "Can I come in?" Lacey asked. Her voice was quiet, nervous. "Why?" "Because I have something you need to see," she said, "and because I think you are the only person who might actually believe me." Against every instinct I had, I stepped aside and let her in. Lacey walked into my tiny apartment and looked around. I could see her taking in the water-stained ceiling, the folding chair, the mattress on the floor. "This is where you live now?" she asked. "Thanks to you and Grant," I said. "Yes." Lacey nodded slowly. She did not argue. "He told me you were cold," she said. "Frigid, that you never touched him, never appreciated him. He said you trapped him with kids, and he had been miserable for 20 years. I know what he told you. I believed him," Lacey continued. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the floor. I was stupid. I thought I was special. I thought I was the one who finally understood him. "What changed?" Lacey laughed. It was a bitter sound. "I moved in," she said, "and I saw who he really is. He does not do anything, does not cook, does not clean, does not even put his own dishes in the dishwasher. He expects everything handed to him. And when I asked about money, about the future, he got angry, really angry." She finally looked up at me. "Last week, I found a letter from the IRS. They are auditing him, something about unreported income. When I asked him about it, he told me it was none of my business, told me to stay in my lane. I kept my face neutral, but inside my heart was racing. "There is more," Lacey said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. I found this in his desk. I took the folder and opened it. Inside was a document I did not recognize at first, but as I read it, I understood. It was a prenuptial agreement, the kind you sign before getting married, but it was not for me and Grant. It was for Grant and Lacey. And buried in the middle was a clause that made my blood run cold. In the event of federal investigation for financial crimes, Lacey read over my shoulder, "All assets acquired during the relationship shall be deemed separate property of Grant Sterling." "He knew," I said slowly. "He knew he was going to be investigated, and he was trying to protect himself from you." Lacey nodded. "He was never going to marry me, was he?" "No," I said. "You were just the next victim." Lacey was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I did not expect. "There is someone else. His assistant, a woman named Sarah Collins. He has been having lunch with her every day for the past month, lingering at her desk, that look in his eyes." She swallowed hard. "The same look he used to give me." I felt something shift in my chest. Not sympathy, exactly. Lacey had done terrible things. She had walked into my house wearing my necklace and talking about tearing down my walls. But looking at her now, I did not see a villain. I saw a woman who had been fooled by the same lies I had believed for 23 years. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because he is going to destroy me too," Lacey said. "And at least this way, I can destroy him first." She stood up and walked to the door. "I am not a good person," she said without turning around. I knew he was married. I did not care. I thought I was winning. She opened the door. "But you cannot win against someone who does not play by any rules. Good luck, Vivian." And then she was gone. I looked at the prenuptial agreement for a long time. Then I called Patricia. Patricia called an emergency meeting at her office. When I arrived, she was not alone. Dorothy was there, looking grimly satisfied. Richard Calloway, Grant's former business partner, sat in the corner with a stack of documents. And there was a woman I did not recognize, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, with the intense focus of someone who loved puzzles. "This is Marlene Hayes," Patricia said, forensic accountant. "I call her the Bloodhound." I sat down, my heart pounding. "What did you find?" Patricia nodded at Marlene, who spread several documents across the table. "Your husband has been busy," Marlene said. She pointed to a series of bank statements. "This is the Cayman account. Over the past 7 years, he has funneled approximately $400,000 through this account." I felt dizzy. "Where did the money come from?" I managed to ask. "Multiple sources," Marlene said. "Some of it is embezzlement from his own company. He was billing personal expenses as business costs. Hotels, jewelry, trips. Richard can testify to that." Richard nodded grimly. "But the bigger issue is this." Marlene pointed to a different document. "These are invoices from a construction company called Apex Builders. Your husband's firm had contracts with them for years. I do not understand." "Apex Builders was paying Grant kickbacks," Patricia explained, "in exchange for steering company contracts their way. It is called commercial bribery. It is very illegal." I stared at the documents. All those years of Grant talking about his business acumen, his strategic partnerships, his networking skills, and it was all just theft. "There is one more thing," Patricia said, "and this is the part you need to sit down for." I was already sitting. Patricia took a breath. "The woman Lacey told you about, Grant's assistant, Sarah Collins. What about her?" Patricia slid a photograph across the table. It showed a woman I did not recognize, professional and composed. "Sarah Collins is an FBI agent," Patricia said. "She has been working undercover at Grant's company for the past 2 years. The Bureau has been investigating Apex Builders for racketeering. Grant was never their main target, but he just made himself very interesting." I could not speak. "The IRS audit Lacey mentioned," Patricia continued. "It is real, but it is not just an audit. It is a criminal investigation. And Grant has no idea." I thought about Grant in his expensive suits, Grant taking photos of my signature, Grant telling Barbara I was easy to manipulate. Grant Sterling, the smartest man in any room, had been so busy trying to destroy me that he had not noticed the FBI building a case against him. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Patricia said, with a smile that showed all her teeth, "we go to court." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had imagined something grand, with high ceilings and marble columns. Instead, it was just a room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs, and the faint smell of old coffee. Grant walked in like he owned the place. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he saved for important client meetings. His lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, walked beside him carrying a leather briefcase. Grant saw me and smiled. It was the same smile he had given me the night he handed me divorce papers, the smile of a man who thinks he has already won. I did not smile back. Patricia took her place at our table. She had a folder in front of her, thick with documents. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The hearing began. Peterson went first. He painted a picture of me as a bitter, vindictive woman. I had refused reasonable settlement offers. I had made wild accusations. I was wasting the court's time with baseless claims. Grant nodded along, looking sympathetic. The poor husband, dealing with a crazy wife. When Peterson finished, Patricia stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "I would like to present Exhibits A through W." What followed was methodical destruction. Patricia presented the Cayman account statements, showing every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer Grant thought he had hidden. She presented the kickback invoices from Apex Builders, with Grant's signature on documents approving inflated contracts. She presented testimony from Richard Calloway about years of embezzlement, with receipts for personal purchases billed as business expenses. She presented Lacey Mitchell's sworn statement about what she had witnessed while living with Grant, including his attempts to hide documents and his conversations about avoiding legal problems. She presented the forged signatures on financial documents confirmed by a handwriting expert. With each exhibit, Grant's smile faded a little more. By the time Patricia presented Exhibit W, a timeline showing how Grant had systematically stripped marital assets while planning his exit, Grant was not smiling at all. His face had gone pale. His hands were gripping the edge of the table. For 23 years, I had been afraid of that face. Afraid of his anger, afraid of his disappointment, afraid of being not good enough. Now I watched the fear move into his eyes, and I felt something I had not expected. Nothing, not satisfaction, not triumph, just a tired emptiness, like setting down a weight I had carried for too long. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 people walked in, a man and a woman, both wearing dark suits. The woman was Sarah Collins, the assistant Grant had been flirting with for months. They walked down the aisle and stopped at Grant's table. "Grant Sterling," the man said. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Marcus Webb," the man said, showing a badge. "FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest." Grant's face went white. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "Peterson, do something." But Peterson was already stepping away from his client, putting distance between himself and a federal investigation. "The charges include tax evasion," Agent Webb continued, "commercial bribery, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice." Sarah Collins, the woman Grant thought was charmed by him, stepped forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," she said. As they led him away, Grant turned back to look at me. "You did this?" he said. "After everything I gave you?" I met his eyes. "You gave me nothing, Grant. I gave you everything, and now I am taking it back." The judge, a woman in her 60s who had been watching the proceedings with increasing interest, cleared her throat. "Well," she said to Patricia, "that is a first." Patricia shrugged. "It is not my first. The cottage sits on a small hill overlooking a lake in northern Ohio. It is not grand. 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a porch that wraps around 2 sides, the kind of place my younger self would have called modest. But when I sit on that porch in the early morning, watching the mist rise off the water, I think it might be the most beautiful place on earth." Grant served 18 months in federal prison. He pleaded guilty to tax fraud to avoid worse charges. When he got out, he moved into his sister's basement and started calling himself a consultant. The last I heard, he was still living there. Lacey Mitchell moved back to Indiana. She became a real estate agent. She sent me one email about a year after the trial. "Thank you for not destroying me too." I wrote back, "We were both his victims. Build a good life." Richard Calloway bought Grant's share of the company and renamed it. He sends me a Christmas card every year. Barbara Reynolds married Grant, if you can believe it. Prison wedding. Some women never learn. My children and I have found our way back to each other. Tyler apologized at his own wedding, standing in front of everyone and saying he was sorry he had ever doubted me. I danced with him that night, and I did not cry until I got home. Madison took longer. She still sends cards at Christmas, still calls on my birthday. We are not close the way we once were, but we are talking, and sometimes that is enough. Dorothy Whitman lives in my guest house. She claims it is so she can make sure I do not become boring, but I think she just likes having someone to watch old movies with. We have solved every mystery in a dozen television series, and we are starting on the British ones. As for me, I am 53 years old. My hair has gone gray, and I have stopped dyeing it. There are lines on my face I have stopped hiding, and every Wednesday night My living room fills with women who are learning what I learned. Last week, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up. A woman got out, mid-30s, mascara streaked down her face, clutching a manila folder. "Are you Vivian Harper?" she asked. "The one who runs the workshop?" "I am. My husband." She swallowed hard. "He has been hiding money. Everyone says I cannot prove it. That I should just take what he offers and be grateful." I looked at this woman. I saw myself 10 years ago, scared and angry and feeling completely alone. "Come inside," I said. "I will make coffee. And then I will tell you something important." "What?" I stood up and held the door open for her. "You are not crazy," I said. "You are not greedy, and you are absolutely not alone." She started crying then, the kind of tears that come when someone finally believes you. I handed her tissues and poured her coffee and sat with her while she told me her story. It was different from mine in the details, but underneath, it was the same story. A woman who had given everything to a man who took and took until there was nothing left. A woman who thought she had no power. She was wrong, of course, just like I had been wrong. Here is something I have learned in the past 5 years. The best revenge is not making him suffer. The best revenge is making yourself whole. It sounds simple. It is not. It is the hardest thing you will ever do. It means looking at yourself honestly, seeing all the ways you let yourself become small. It means forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made when you were trying to survive. It means building a new life from the rubble of the old one, brick by brick, until one day you look up and realize you have built something beautiful. I am not the woman I was at 48. Signing papers I did not understand because I was too tired to fight. I am not the woman crying on her bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, wondering if she should just disappear. I am Vivian Harper. I am 53 years old. I work part-time at a nonprofit that helps women in divorce cases. I grow tomatoes that never quite turn out right. I have a cat named Justice, who knocks things off tables for no reason. And every Wednesday night, I tell women the story of how I lost everything and found myself. Not because I want them to feel sorry for me, not because I think my story is special, but because I know what it feels like to think you are alone, to think no one understands, to think there is no way forward. There is always a way forward. Sometimes it leads through a courtroom. Sometimes it leads through a tiny apartment with water stains on the ceiling. Sometimes it leads through the hardest conversation you have ever had with your children. But it always leads somewhere. And wherever it leads, you will be stronger when you get there than when you started. Trust me, I know. If you have ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever watched karma catch up to someone who deserved it? I read every single comment. And your stories inspire the content I create. If this video helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth making. So if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. And if you want more stories like this, stories about women who refuse to be broken, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. New stories drop every week. Now, let us begin. Closing statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with real life lessons. Every word is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our viewers. Thank you for being part of this community.